A gifted but poor girl challenged a millionaire musician to a trumpet duel, unaware he was the reclusive genius who could save her family. You think that noise is music? Let's see what you've really got. The rain hammered down on the grimy cobblestones like 1,000 desperate fists, relentless and wild. Each drop that struck Alara's threadbare coat felt like a tiny, biting cold reminder of her impossible situation, a chilling echo of the sterile silence in her mother's hospital room. She stood in the amber hue of a lone street lamp, her fingers pale and trembling, clenched around the worn brass of her father's old trumpet. The instrument was dented and tarnished, its shine long since surrendered to time and hardship, but to her, it was a sacred locket holding the last echoes of his laughter and the unwavering strength of his love. Its weight was a familiar, grounding presence against the hollow ache in her chest. She needed to make enough for the medicine tonight. Just enough. That was all she prayed for. The biting cold wind whipped down the narrow alley, carrying with it the scent of wet asphalt and distant, uncaring city life. She drew a shaky breath, the air splintering in her lungs, and lifted the trumpet to her lips. She closed her eyes, shutting out the flickering light and the deep, oppressive shadows that clung to the brick walls like a shroud. The world vanished. There was only the music, a raw, unspoken prayer for a miracle she was beginning to believe would never come. Her first note, pure and clear, cut through the relentless drumming of the rain. It was a sound of such profound, tender longing that it seemed to make the very air around her shimmer with sorrow. It was a melody born of quiet, dignified desperation. A story of sleepless nights and whispered fears, of a daughter's selfless love for a fading mother. She poured every ounce of her shattered hope into the song. It was all she had left. The sound carried, a fragile thread of gold in the vast, indifferent tapestry of the city's noise. It drifted into the cavernous doorway of a stately, forgotten theater where a man stood cloaked in shadow, his silhouette a study in stillness. This was Julian Croft, a name once whispered with reverence in the polished marble halls of concert venues around the world, now a ghost haunting the edges of the life he once commanded. His face, gaunt and etched with a weary grief that had long since extinguished the fire in his eyes, was turned towards the source of the sound. He had been wandering for hours, a king in self-imposed exile, his own gleaming, custom-made trumpet a heavy, useless weight in its sleek leather case. For 2 years, since the world had stolen his wife, his muse, his melody, he had been trapped in a sterile silence of his own making. Music had become a foreign language, a collection of empty notes that mocked him with memories of what he had lost. He had sought out noise, the city's chaotic symphony, to drown out the unbearable quiet in his soul, but it never worked. The silence always found him. But this sound, this was different. It wasn't the technically perfect, soulless performance he was used to hearing from aspiring prodigies. It was raw. It was real. It was the sound of a heart cracking open and bleeding its truth into the cold night air. He felt something stir within him, a painful, unfamiliar thudding in the hollow space where his own music used to live. He stepped out from the shadows, his expensive shoes making no sound on the wet pavement. He was a man drowning, and for the first time in years, he had heard a sound that wasn't the roar of the water filling his lungs. He saw her then, a fragile figure haloed in the lamplight, her eyes closed in concentration, her entire being focused on the desperate, beautiful sound she was creating. He saw the worn fabric of her coat, the thinness of her frame, the earnest purity in the way she held the battered instrument. A wave of his old, bitter cynicism washed over him. Couldn't be real. In his transactional world of contracts and endorsements, such pure, selfless expression was a myth, a fairy tale told to fools. It had to be a performance, a trick. He had to shatter it, to prove to himself that the world was as broken and hollow as he was. He had to know. He waited until her last note faded, a final, trembling sigh that seemed to hang in the air for an eternity before being swallowed by the night. The silence that followed was heavy, profound. He watched her lower the trumpet, her shoulders slumping with an exhaustion that went far beyond the physical. She opened her eyes, and they were the color of a stormy sea, glistening with unshed tears. He stepped forward, his presence commanding even in his simple, dark attire. "You think that noise is music?" he asked, his voice a low rasp, intentionally cruel. "Let's see what you've really got," Alara gasped, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked up at the stranger, his features obscured by the deep shadows cast by the street lamp. All she could see was a tall, imposing figure and a pair of haunted eyes that seemed to hold a universe of pain. His words were a physical blow, striking at the one pure thing she had left. A flush of shame and anger warmed her frozen cheeks. "It's all I have," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding rain. He took another step closer, his gaze dropping to the open, near-empty trumpet case at her feet, where a few sparse coins lay like forgotten wishes. "I challenge you," he said, his tone flat, devoid of emotion. "A duel. My song against yours. Winner takes the pot." He gestured to the few coins with a dismissive flick of his wrist. It was a paltry sum, barely enough for a cup of tea, let alone the life-saving medicine she so desperately needed. But it was the principle. He was mocking her father's memory, mocking the very soul she poured into her music. A quiet, dignified resolve settled over her. She would not let this stranger, this ghost with sad eyes, diminish her. She would not let him break her. She lifted her chin, her gaze unflinching. "Fine," she said, her voice steady now. "You're on." He simply nodded, producing a small, tarnished flask from his pocket. He took a long drink, the liquid inside clearly not for warmth. He then unzipped a simple canvas bag, and Alara expected him to pull out an instrument as worn as her own. Instead, he withdrew a trumpet that seemed to drink the lamplight and radiate it back. It was a gleaming, polished silver, a thing of impossible beauty and craftsmanship. Its sleek lines and impeccable finish spoke of a world she couldn't even imagine. He didn't seem to notice its magnificence. He held it like a common tool, his expression unchanging. He raised it to his lips. The sound that emerged was technically flawless. It was a cascade of intricate notes, a dizzying display of skill that spoke of thousands of hours of relentless practice. The melody was complex, a breathtaking feat of musical gymnastics. He played with a speed and precision that should have been awe-inspiring, each note perfectly articulated, each run executed with crisp, cold perfection. A few passers-by, drawn by the unexpected concert, stopped and stared, their umbrellas tilted against the rain. They were captivated by the sheer brilliance of the performance. But Alara heard what they didn't. She heard the gaping, cavernous emptiness at the heart of the music. There was no joy, no sorrow, no anger, no love. It was a sterile silence, a hollow echo. It was the sound of a man who had forgotten why he was playing in the first place. It was the most heartbreaking sound she had ever heard. When he finished, the small crowd applauded politely, impressed by the spectacle. He lowered the horn, his eyes finding hers in the gloom. There was no triumph in his expression, only that same bottomless, haunted emptiness. Now it was her turn. The pressure should have been unbearable. The gleaming silver of his instrument seemed to mock the dull brass of her own. The polite applause he had received was more than she usually earned in a week. But she felt no fear, only a profound, aching pity for the man standing before her. She knew what she had to play. She didn't play for the coins or for the pride of winning some strange, sad duel. She played for him. She played the simple lullaby her father used to play for her when she was a child, a melody as gentle and warm as his embrace. It was a song of safety, of unconditional love, of a quiet, steady light in the darkness. Her notes were not as fast or as complex as his. Some of them even cracked with the force of her emotion. But they were alive. They trembled with a raw, sincere vulnerability. The melody swelled, filling the rain-soaked alley not with technical perfection, but with something far more powerful, truth. It spoke of a love that endures beyond loss, a hope that flickers even in the deepest despair. It was a musical hand reaching out in the dark. The small crowd fell silent. The polite smiles vanished, replaced by expressions of stunned, quiet contemplation. A woman dabbed at her eyes with a gloved hand. The sounds of the city seemed to fade away, leaving only the soft whisper of the rain and the trumpet's tender, cathartic cry. When her final note hung in the air, a single, perfect teardrop of sound, no one applauded. The silence was deeper, more meaningful than any ovation. It was a shared moment of sacred stillness. People simply started walking forward, one by one, and placing bills into her trumpet case. Not just coins, but crisp $5, $10, even $20 bills. They didn't look at her, but at the stranger, as if they understood this was about more than just music. It was an offering. In moments, the case was filled with more money than she had ever seen in her life. She stared at it in disbelief, her mind reeling. Julian froze. He stood utterly still, his own magnificent instrument hanging limply in his hand. Her music had bypassed every wall he had built, every layer of cynical scar tissue around his heart, and struck him somewhere deep and forgotten. It was the lullaby his wife, Anya, used to hum while she painted. He hadn't heard it in 2 years. He hadn't allowed himself to even think of it. The melody, so pure and innocent from Alara's trumpet, had unlocked a memory so visceral it stole the air from his lungs. He saw Anya in her sun-drenched studio, a smudge of paint on her cheek, her head tilted as she hummed that very tune. The image was so vivid, so real, that a sob caught in his throat. The grief he had been suppressing for 2 years rose up like a tidal wave, immense and unbearable. He felt his carefully constructed composure begin to splinter. He looked at Alara, at her wide, concerned eyes, and saw not a rival, but a reflection of a purity he thought had vanished from the world. She had played his wife's song, a song she couldn't possibly know. It was a coincidence so profound it felt like a sign, a message from a silent universe. He was speechless. He was shattered. Alara saw the change in him. The hard, cynical mask had cracked, revealing the raw, undisguised agony beneath. His shoulders trembled slightly, and his knuckles were white where he gripped his silver trumpet. The duel was forgotten. The money was forgotten. All she saw was a human being in desperate, unspoken pain. This was beat 2 of the kindness scene, the internal hesitation overcome by inherent goodness. She hesitated for only a second. This money was her mother's medicine. It was rent. It was food. It was a lifeline. But the look in this man's eyes was one of such profound desolation that her own problems seemed to shrink in comparison. She knelt, her knees soaking through her thin trousers on the wet pavement. She carefully gathered all the bills from the case. Then she stood up and walked directly to him. She didn't say a word. She simply took his free hand, which was as cold as ice, and pressed half of the crumpled bills into his palm, closing his fingers around them. Then, she picked up her worn, dented thermos from the ground. It contained the last of the hot, sweet tea she had made that morning, the one luxury she allowed herself. Without a thought for her own shivering, she unscrewed the cap and pushed it into his other hand. "Your fingers look colder than mine," she said, her voice a soft, gentle murmur. "You need this more." This was the selfless act, the core of the profile's requirement. He stared at the money in his hand, then at the steaming thermos, and finally, his gaze lifted to her face. His eyes, which had been so hollow, now glistened with a startling, raw emotion. He looked at her as if he were seeing a ghost, or an angel, or something equally unbelievable. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. The world had been a brutal, transactional place for so long, a world of contracts, agents, and calculated moves. This simple, unsolicited act of kindness from a stranger who had nothing was so foreign, so seismic. It completely dismantled his understanding of reality. It was a light turning on in a room he had thought would be dark forever. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would change everything. She gave him a small, sad smile, then turned and began to pack her trumpet away. She left his share of the money on a dry patch of a windowsill. She had given him what he needed, but she could not accept a reward for it. It would have tainted the moment. By the time he found his voice, a choked, broken whisper of a wait. She had already vanished into the swirling fog and relentless rain. She was gone. The biting cold of her small apartment was a stark contrast to the momentary warmth of her encounter with the stranger. The single radiator in the corner offered a weak, rattling hiss that did little to combat the damp chill seeping through the window frames. Alara counted the money she had kept, her fingers trembling not just from the cold, but from a lingering sense of disbelief. It was enough for her mother's prescription this week, with a little left over for groceries. A wave of relief so profound it made her dizzy washed over her. She placed the worn bills into an old tea tin, a sacred container for her hopes. Then she noticed the piece of paper slipped under her door. Her heart thudded in her chest. She knew what it was before she even opened it. The crisp, formal letters of the eviction notice seemed to mock her small victory. The landlord, Mr. Gable, was a man whose heart seemed to be as cold and hard as the coins he hoarded. She had pleaded with him for an extension last week, explaining her mother's situation, but his eyes had remained flat and merciless. Now he had made his final move. She had 2 weeks. 2 weeks to find a new home, to move her fragile mother, to come up with a deposit she could never afford. The temporary relief she had felt vanished, replaced by a familiar, heavy dread. The silence of the apartment deepened, broken only by the relentless hammering of the rain against the glass. The city lights outside blurred into a meaningless watercolor of indifference. She sank onto her threadbare sofa, pulling a thin, worn blanket around her shoulders. She felt so utterly alone. The image of the strange musician with the haunted eyes and the gleaming trumpet surfaced in her mind. She wondered who he was, what sorrow had carved such deep lines into his face. For a moment, sharing that music and that small act of kindness had made her feel connected, a part of something larger than her own suffering. Now, the memory only amplified her isolation. He was a ghost who had drifted into her life and drifted out again, leaving behind a mystery and a profound sense of an unspoken, shared grief. She was just a girl with a dented trumpet and an eviction notice. He was from another world. Total silence. Meanwhile, across the city, Julian Croft stood in the cavernous living room of his penthouse apartment. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of the storm-lashed city, a glittering, anonymous sprawl that had once felt like his kingdom. Now it just felt empty. His sleek, impeccable home was a museum of his former life. Gold records lined one wall, awards glittered from glass shelves, and a magnificent grand piano sat untouched under a layer of dust. He hadn't entered this room in 2 years. Tonight he had. In one hand, he still clutched the crumpled bills Alara had pressed into his palm. In the other, he held her cheap, dented thermos. He hadn't drunk the tea. He couldn't. It felt too sacred, a tangible piece of her selfless spirit. He had placed the thermos on his polished marble mantelpiece, next to a silver-framed photograph of his wife. It looked absurdly out of place, a humble relic in a palace of grief. His mind raced. Her music, her kindness, the impossible coincidence of the lullaby. It all swirled together into a single, undeniable conclusion. He had been sleepwalking through a nightmare, and this girl, this stranger, had just shaken him awake. A new feeling began to burn through the fog of his cynicism. A fierce, protective urgency. He couldn't let that purity be extinguished by the world's casual cruelty. He had seen the desperation in her eyes, the worn state of her clothes. He had seen the near-empty trumpet case before the crowd had filled it. He knew she was in trouble. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. It was no longer about his own pain or his own music. It was about her. He strode over to his desk and picked up the phone, his movements crisp and decisive. He dialed the number of his personal assistant, a man who had been patiently managing his crumbling empire while Julian himself had crumbled. "Arthur," he said, his voice raw but firm, a commanding tone returning to it for the first time in ages. "I have a job for you. I need you to find someone," he described Alara in meticulous detail. The street corner, the threadbare coat, the storm-colored eyes, and the old, battered trumpet. "I don't have a name, but find her. I want to know everything." her financial situation, her family, whatever struggles she's facing. Use every resource we have. I want a full report on my desk by morning. And Arthur? Be discreet. She is not to know she is being watched. He hung up the phone. He walked back to the window and looked out at the rain. He didn't know her name, but he felt as if he knew her soul. He had heard it in her music. He made a silent, solemn vow to the stormy night. He would not let her suffer. He had the power, the wealth, and the influence to change her world, and he would use it all to repay the girl who had, with a simple song and a cup of tea, given him back a reason to live. He would be her hidden savior. Arthur was ruthlessly efficient. By 9 a.m. the next morning, a sleek, encrypted file lay open on Julian's tablet. Contained everything. Alara Vance. Her mother, Sarah Vance, battling a severe respiratory illness in a public hospital. The bills piling up into a mountain of debt. The eviction notice from a slumlord named Marcus Gable. Her job as a dishwasher in a dingy diner, where she worked grueling hours for minimum wage. The report was a bleak chronicle of quiet, dignified suffering. It was a story of a young woman shouldering an unbearable burden with unwavering grace. Julian read every word, and a cold, protective anger solidified within him. The world had been relentlessly cruel to someone so pure. That was about to change. His first call was to the hospital's billing department. Speaking under the guise of a representative from a charitable foundation, he settled Sarah Vance's entire outstanding medical debt in a single, anonymous transaction. The clerk on the other end of the line was stunned into silence. Next, he had Arthur contact a high-end grocery delivery service. He curated a list himself, filling it not with extravagant luxuries, but with nourishing, comforting foods, fresh fruits, organic vegetables, hearty soups, and a variety of herbal teas known for their healing properties. The order was to be delivered that afternoon, with a simple and signed note that read, "From a friend who believes in your music." His final action of the morning was the most satisfying. He had Arthur's legal team look into Mr. Marcus Gable. It took them less than an hour to uncover a history of predatory practices and code violations. Julian purchased the entire apartment building through a shell corporation. By noon, he was Marcus Gable's new, anonymous landlord. An official letter was dispatched immediately, not to Alara, but to Gable, informing him that his management contract was terminated, effective immediately. Another letter was sent to all tenants, announcing a rent freeze and a full building renovation, with a special addendum for apartment 3B, Alara's home, stating that her lease was secure indefinitely, her rent forgiven for the next year as a lottery prize for a valued tenant. He had built a fortress of protection around her, all from the sterile silence of his penthouse. He was a ghost, a guardian angel, moving unseen through the architecture of her life, systematically dismantling her hardships. But it wasn't enough. He had solved her material problems, but he felt a desperate need to see her again, to talk to her, to understand the source of the light she carried. He needed to make sure the hope in her music hadn't been extinguished. He had to reconnect. Alara's world tilted on its axis. She returned from her shift at the diner, her body aching and her mind numb with worry about the eviction, to find 2 large boxes of groceries outside her door. The note, with its simple, elegant script, made her heart leap into her throat. From a friend who believes in your music, a friend? She had no friends who could afford such a lavish gift. Her mind immediately went to the stranger with the silver trumpet. Could it be him? The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Before she could even process this mystery, the phone rang. It was the hospital. A cheerful administrator informed her that an anonymous benefactor had paid her mother's entire medical bill, in full. Alara sank into a chair, the phone slipping from her trembling hand. She started to cry, not tears of sorrow, but of a cathartic, overwhelming relief that was so intense it was painful. It felt like a miracle, a prayer answered so completely it defied belief. The final shock came in the afternoon mail. The letter from the new building ownership, announcing her lottery win. The eviction was gone. Her rent was gone for a year. It was too much. It felt like a dream, a beautiful, impossible dream from which she was terrified she would wake. For the first time in years, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a crushing pressure that she hadn't even realized was slowly killing her. She could breathe. That evening, she didn't have to go out and busk in the cold. Instead, she sat by her mother's bedside at the hospital, holding her hand. Her mother seemed brighter, her breathing less labored, as if the news of their salvation had been a medicine in itself. "An angel must be watching over us, my dear," Sarah whispered, her voice still fragile. Alara simply squeezed her hand, her heart too full to speak. She didn't know who this hidden savior was, but they had given her back her hope. The next day, feeling a renewed sense of purpose, she went to her usual spot to play her trumpet. Not for money this time, but for the sheer joy of it. The sun was out, a rare winter gift, casting a golden glow over the city. Her music was different today. The sorrow was still there, a deep, resonant undertone, but now it was woven with threads of gratitude and a cautious, budding optimism. As she played, a figure approached. It was him, the man from the alley. He wasn't dressed in the simple, dark clothes of their first meeting. He wore an impeccable, tailored coat and carried himself with a quiet, commanding confidence. His haunted eyes were the same, but today, they held a flicker of something new, a soft light. He stopped a few feet away, simply listening until she finished her song. "That was beautiful," he said, his voice smoother, warmer than she remembered. "My name is Julian." He didn't offer his last name. He wanted to meet her on equal terms. Alara's heart fluttered. "I'm Alara," she said, her voice shy. "Did you? The groceries? The hospital bill?" She had to ask. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Your kindness the other night," he said, his gaze steady and unwavering. "It was significant. I wanted to repay it." "Repay it? You've saved us," she stammered, overwhelmed. "I can never thank you enough." "You already did," he said quietly. "More than you know." He gestured to a small cafe across the street. "May I buy you a coffee? I'd like to hear more about your music." They sat in a quiet corner of the cafe, a warm, safe space filled with the aroma of coffee and baked bread. The flickering light from a small candle on their table cast a gentle amber hue on their faces. This was the confession scene, the forging of their bond. Julian watched her as she cradled her cup of hot chocolate, her hands still bearing the faint redness of a dishwasher's labor. He felt a profound tenderness towards her, a need to protect the gentle, unwavering spirit that shone from her eyes. He asked about her father and the trumpet. Alara's expression softened. She spoke of him with a love so pure it was almost tangible. She told Julian how her father, a factory worker with the soul of a poet, had saved for years to buy the trumpet. How he had taught her to play, not by reading sheet music, but by listening to the world, the rhythm of the rain, the melody of birdsong, the sad songs of the train whistle in the night. He said music was the world's way of telling its secrets, she explained, her voice thick with emotion. "He said as long as I had this trumpet, I'd never be truly alone." This is his voice. "It's all I have left of him." Julian listened with an unwavering, steady intensity that made her feel truly seen. He didn't offer empty platitudes or condolences. He simply listened, his silence a comforting blanket of empathy. When she finished, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, he didn't wipe it away. He just pushed a napkin gently across the table. A simple, respectful gesture. Then it was his turn. He didn't reveal his fame or his wealth. He spoke of his own loss in veiled, allegorical terms. "I lost someone too," he began, his voice low and raw. "She was my music, my reason for playing. When she was gone, the notes just became empty sounds. I had the finest instrument in the world, but I had nothing to say." He looked down at his hands, clenching them on the table. "I wandered for years in that silence. And then I heard you. You were playing with a dented old horn in the freezing rain. And you had more to say than I've heard in any concert hall. You were playing the truth." Alara looked at him, and for the first time, she understood the source of his deep, hollow sadness. They were two sides of the same coin. She had used music to hold onto a memory, while he had been silenced by one. They were bound by a shared grief. "The song you played," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "The lullaby." It was her favorite, Elara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The coincidence was too profound, too cosmic to be ignored. It felt like fate, a thread connecting their two disparate lives across a chasm of sorrow. They sat in a comfortable silence for a long time, the unspoken understanding between them more powerful than any words. As they prepared to leave, Julian placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a brief, non-romantic touch that was nonetheless electric. "You have a rare gift, Elara," he said, his eyes sincere. "It deserves to be heard. There's an open audition for a scholarship at the Blackwood Conservatory next week. It's the best music school in the country. You should go." Hope, bright and terrifying, bloomed in Elara's chest. The Blackwood Conservatory was a dream, a distant star she had never dared to wish upon. I couldn't," she stammered. "They wouldn't look twice at someone like me." "They'd be fools not to," Julian said, his voice firm. "Let me help you prepare." Please, it was an offer she couldn't refuse. In that moment, he wasn't a mysterious benefactor. He was a friend, a kindred spirit who understood her language. She agreed. She had no idea that Julian himself had arranged the open audition, pulling strings as the conservatory's largest and most anonymous benefactor. He was creating the stage not just for her talent, but for the final act of her salvation. The day of the audition arrived, a crisp, clear morning that felt full of promise. Julian had spent the week with Elara, not coaching her technique, which he found beautifully raw and authentic, but building her confidence. He had brought her a new outfit, a simple but elegant dark blue dress, and had her trumpet professionally cleaned and polished. It still bore its dents, its character, but it now had a soft, dignified gleam. As they stood before the ornate, imposing doors of the Blackwood Conservatory, Elara's courage began to falter. The building was a stately cathedral of music, its polished marble floors and cavernous halls echoing with the sounds of perfectly tuned instruments. It felt like another world, a world she did not belong in. Julian squeezed her hand. "Your music belongs here," he whispered, his voice a steady anchor. "Remember what your father said. Tell them the world's secrets." She nodded, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The audition room was intimidating. A panel of 3 judges sat at a long, dark wood table on a raised platform, their faces stern and impassive. In the center sat Marcus Thorne, the conservatory's director, a man known for his elitist standards and his cruel, dismissive demeanor. He was the antagonist, the foil for her triumph. He peered down at Elara over his spectacles, his lip curling in a faint sneer as he took in her simple dress and her still visibly dented trumpet. "Name?" he asked, his voice dripping with impatience. "Elara Vance," she said, her own voice trembling slightly. Thorne made a show of looking through his papers. Vance, ah yes, the street musician." The way he said the words made them sound like an accusation. The other judges shifted uncomfortably. Elara's face flushed, but she held her head high. She would not let him intimidate her. She would play. She chose the piece she had played in the alley, the one that had connected her to Julian, her father's lullaby. As the first pure, tender notes filled the acoustically perfect room, a hush fell over the judges. The raw, emotional power of her music was undeniable. It was a sound that demanded to be felt, not just heard. But Marcus Thorne was not listening with his heart. He was listening for pedigree, for technical perfection, for a resume he could boast about. Halfway through her performance, he held up a hand, abruptly cutting her off. "Enough," he said, his voice sharp and dismissive. "Thank you, Miss Vance. That will be all." Elara froze, the note dying on her lips. She was shattered. The public humiliation was a physical blow. "But I wasn't finished," she whispered. Thorne leaned back in his chair, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Oh, I think you are. This conservatory is a serious institution for dedicated artists, not a charity for hobbyists. Your sentimentality is charming in a rustic sort of way, but it is not art. You do not belong here." The words were like acid. Alara stood frozen, her trumpet feeling heavy and useless in her hands. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the faces of her tormentors. She felt all the hope that had bloomed within her wither and die. She was just a girl with a dented trumpet after all. They were right. She didn't belong. Just as she was about to turn and flee, a quiet, commanding voice echoed from the back of the auditorium. "I disagree." Every head in the room snapped towards the entrance. Julian Croft stood there, his arms crossed, his expression calm but radiating a power that instantly shifted the atmosphere in the room. He walked down the aisle, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. He didn't look at the judges. His unwavering gaze was fixed on Alara, offering her a silent promise of support. This was the salvation scene. Marcus Thorne's jaw dropped. "Mr. Croft, what an unexpected honor. We had no idea you were in the city." His fawning tone was a stark contrast to the cruelty he had just shown Alara. "Clearly," Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. He stopped at the foot of the stage, turning his cool gaze on Thorne. "I was listening from the hallway. I heard what I believe is the most honest, profoundly moving music I have heard within these walls in a decade." He then looked at Alara, his voice softening. "And then I heard you, Mr. Thorne." Thorne paled. I was simply maintaining the conservatory's high standards." "Your standards?" Julian cut him off, his voice rising with a controlled fury. "You, a man who mistakes soulless technicality for passion? A man who cannot tell the difference between a gilded cage and a living, breathing songbird? You wouldn't know real art if it played a lullaby that could mend a broken soul." Julian stepped onto the stage and stood beside Alara, a protective, solid presence. He addressed the entire room, his voice resonating with authority. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Julian Croft, and for the past 5 years, I have been the primary benefactor of this conservatory under the anonymous title of the Anya Foundation, named for my late wife." A collective gasp went through the room. Thorne looked as if he were about to faint. "This foundation was created to find and nurture talent like hers," Julian said, gesturing to Alara. "Raw, authentic, passionate talent. Not to create more musical automatons who can play a million notes without a single drop of feeling. You, Mr. Thorne, have failed in that mission. You have become a gatekeeper of elitism, not a nurturer of art. As of this moment, your position as director is terminated." The finality of his words hung in the air. Thorne sputtered, speechless and utterly defeated. The power dynamic had been completely and irrevocably reversed. Julian then turned to Alara, his eyes filled with a tender, profound admiration. "Alara Vance," he said, his voice now gentle for her alone to hear. "The Blackwood Conservatory is officially offering you the first ever Anya Foundation Legacy Scholarship. A full ride, including tuition, housing, and a living stipend. We would be honored to have you." Tears were now streaming freely down Alara's face, but they were tears of disbelief, of hope, of a joy so intense it was cathartic. She was speechless. Julian smiled, a true warm smile that reached his haunted eyes and filled them with light. "And I," he added, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper, "would be honored to be your private mentor." It was more than a professional offer. It was a promise, a declaration. In that moment, in front of the silenced judges and her defeated tormentor, he had not only saved her dream, he had publicly claimed her as his own, defending her virtue and championing her spirit. He had solved all her problems. He had become her unwavering savior. He reached out and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "You do belong here," he murmured. "You belong wherever you want to be." The year that followed was a whirlwind of transformation. Alara moved into a beautiful, sunlit apartment near the conservatory, paid for by her scholarship. Her mother, now healthy and vibrant, moved in with her, spending her days tending to a small balcony garden and humming along to the sound of Alara's practicing. Julian was true to his word. He became her mentor, her champion, and slowly, inevitably, her dearest friend. They spent countless hours in his vast, silent penthouse, which was no longer silent. Alara's music filled every corner, chasing away the ghosts of his grief. She learned theory and technique from him, and he, in turn, learned from her how to reconnect with the emotion, the why of his music. He started to compose again, for the first time in years. His new pieces were different, infused with a depth and a tender hope that had been absent before. One evening, as they sat together at his grand piano, working on a duet, their hands brushed. A spark, gentle and undeniable, passed between them. The student-mentor relationship had quietly, naturally blossomed into something more profound. Julian turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "Alara," he began, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "When I met you, I was a ghost. My world was black and white. You brought the color back. You didn't just save my music. You saved me." Alara's heart swelled. "You saved me too, Julian," she whispered. "You saw me when no one else did." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Alara Vance," he said, the words simple, sincere, and sacred. "I think I have since the moment I heard you play in the rain." "I love you too," she replied, her voice steady and sure. The resolution was complete. Her material hardships were gone. Her artistic dreams were being realized, and her heart had found its home. They were no longer the virtuous sufferer and the hidden savior. They were just two musicians, two souls who had found their harmony in each other. Their shared history of grief now the fertile ground from which a profound and lasting love had grown. Their past sorrows had not been erased, but transformed into the deep, resonant bass notes of a beautiful, complex, and enduring love song. They had healed each other. 1 year later, the scene is the grand opening of a new city-funded community music hall, a project spearheaded and funded by Julian. The air is electric with anticipation. The final performance of the night is a world premiere of a new duet composed by the legendary Julian Croft, featuring a brilliant new artist, Alara Vance. They walk onto the stage to thunderous applause. Alara is radiant in a simple, elegant gown the color of a midnight sky. In her hands is a gleaming, custom-made silver trumpet, a gift from Julian, engraved with a single line from her father. "Tell the world's secrets." Julian, handsome and confident in a crisp tuxedo, looks at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated love. He no longer looks like a ghost. He looks like a man who has come home. They raise their instruments. He plays his gleaming silver horn, and she plays hers. The music that fills the cavernous hall is breathtaking. It is a perfect fusion of his technical brilliance and her raw, emotional soul. It tells a story of loss, of wandering in the darkness, of a single, flickering light in the rain. It speaks of a chance encounter, a selfless act of kindness, and the miraculous, healing power of being truly seen by another person. The melody soars, a testament to their journey, a symphony of two hearts beating as one. The final note hangs in the air, shimmering with all the unspoken love and gratitude that flows between them. The audience is silent for a beat, utterly captivated, before erupting into a standing ovation that shakes the very foundations of the hall. Alara and Julian lower their trumpets, their eyes locked. In the reflection of her gleaming new instrument, she can still see the faint outline of the dents from her father's old trumpet, a reminder of the journey that brought her here. She smiles, a tear of pure joy glistening on her cheek. They are home. Their idyllic life is a testament to the miracle that began with a simple song on a cold, rainy night. This story is a fable, a timeless reminder that in a world that often feels transactional and cold, a single, selfless act of kindness can create ripples that change lives in the most miraculous ways. It shows us that true wealth is not measured in dollars or accolades, but in the courage to reach out to a stranger in their moment of need, to offer warmth when the world is cold. Alara, with nothing but a dented trumpet and a pure heart, offered a gift that no amount of money could buy. She offered empathy. Julian, a man who had everything and nothing, was saved not by his fortune, but by his ability to recognize the value of that gift and to repay it with the full force of his gratitude and power. Their journey reminds us that our deepest wounds can become the source of our greatest strength, and that the music of our lives is most beautiful when played as a duet. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the profound power of compassion, please take a moment to carry that feeling forward. Perhaps there is someone in your own life who needs to be seen, to be heard, to be reminded that they are not alone. A small gesture, a cup of tea, a listening ear, a simple word of encouragement can be the note that changes the entire melody of their day or even their life. Let this story inspire you to be the hidden savior in someone else's narrative, to believe in the quiet miracles that unfold every day when one heart dares to connect with another. For more soul-stirring tales of love, redemption, and the incredible strength of the human spirit, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. We believe that stories can heal, inspire, and remind us of the very best of what we can be. Join our community and help us spread more heartwarming and inspiring stories across the world. We'll see you in the next one.